Do you think medieval women just sat around waiting to be married off, pop out kids, and fade into history? In 1484, a 24-year-old woman, 7 months pregnant, rode alone and captured Rome's most impregnable fortress, Castel Sant'Angelo, and used that single move to secure her husband's military command and control over 2 cities. Just did. Of course, it wasn't that simple. She wasn't acting out an Assassin's Creed mission. She was exploiting the institutional vacuum left by a pope's death, turning her own pregnant body and family name into real negotiating leverage. Today, let's talk about how one pregnant woman taught the men of Europe a lesson in power games. If you've played Assassin's Creed II or watched any viral video about Renaissance Italy, you've probably seen the famous scene. A pregnant woman stands on a castle wall, lifts her skirt, and shouts at the rebels below, "You want my children? Take them. I've got the tools to make more." The comments explode. True Iron Lady. Renaissance's baddest. Crazier than Cersei in Game of Thrones. Slap on the label. Dollar. And everyone thinks they get it. She's a fearless madwoman, a badass solo act taking on the Pope. But, of course, it wasn't that simple. Let me explain why that line wasn't some wild tantrum, but a textbook move in 15th century Italian inheritance warfare. Understand the institutional machinery behind her first, then go back and judge her. First, let's get one thing straight. The famous lifting her skirt on the ramparts story, not in the actual records. The more credible version is that she claimed to be carrying her husband's legitimate heir. In other words, kill the kids you've got in front of you, I've got another one in the oven. You do the math. What's worth more, a corpse or a living heir? She wasn't losing it, she was using inheritance rules to counter her enemies. Now, a quick vocabulary reset. First, she wasn't facing the Pope as we think of him today. That term is too modern. Back then, it was the pontiff, not a gentle old man in white, but an armed warlord on the chessboard of 15th century Italian city-states. The papal states were fragmented, basically 5 or 6 little lords fighting over turf. The Pope himself was a patron of mercenaries, Dara, a backer of his nephews, and a general agent for his family's lands. Under that holy robe, he wore chainmail. Second, mercenaries weren't ragtag soldiers. They were more like modern military contractors. Contracts, fixed rates, performance bonds, penalties for breach. Good service led to renewal. Bad service might get the boss sold out to the client. With that cleared up, let's break down the system. Italy in the late 15th century was more fragmented than a jigsaw puzzle. City-states everywhere, Milan, Florence, Venice, Naples, plus a fractured papal states, and the Ottoman Empire lurking in the east. What held power together? Blood, marriage, violence, but also something called legitimate faking. Papal grants, marriage contracts, adoption of nephews, inheritance by adoption. No unified sovereignty existed. Priests, each lord's legitimacy was a patchwork of recognition and dispute from multiple parties. Where did Caterina Sforza's power come from? Her grandfather, Francesco Sforza, was a mercenary captain, illegitimate by birth but a brilliant fighter. In 1450, the Milanese council made him duke. He fathered dozens of children with at least 8 women. Caterina's father, Galeazzo Maria Sforza, became one of those dukes. Her mother was Lucrezia Landriani, a noblewoman. Key turn: when Caterina was 5, her father married Bona of Savoy, the Duchess, who chose to adopt and legitimate all of her husband's illegitimate children. So Caterina had 3 mothers backing her rise. Then, at 10, she was betrothed to 30-year-old Girolamo Riario, nephew of Pope Sixtus I. One Sixtus I did something that in church history is classic. He gave church property, the towns of Imola and Forli, directly to his nephew. The upside, loyalty. A nephew is more reliable than an outsider. The downside, a nest of inheritance disputes. Can a pope's gift be hereditary? Does it expire when the pope dies? If you fall out with the new pope, can he take it back? That's the loophole the system created. Now to the case itself. In 1488, Girolamo Riario was stabbed to death in his room by 3 former bodyguards, his body thrown out the window. Forli erupted in rebellion. A mob sacked Caterina's home and seized her and her children, but the city's fortress was still held by a commander loyal to the Riarios. Caterina proposed, let her go to the fortress to persuade the garrison to surrender. The Orsi family agreed, but kept her children as hostages. Once inside, she slammed the gate shut and ordered the garrison to keep fighting. The Orsis, furious, shouted from below, "Surrender the fortress or we kill your children." Her famous reply came in that context, but the actual calculation was she was already pregnant, or claimed to be, so she could gamble that they wouldn't dare kill the children. Why? Because if they killed the heirs, she still had a legitimate heir in her womb. Even more critical, as long as a legitimate heir survived, she, as regent, could keep ruling. If all heirs died, she would lose not only her bargaining chips, but also her legitimacy, and her power would vanish instantly. This wasn't a madwoman's outburst. It was a precise inheritance law play, and her other legendary move, capturing Castel Sant'Angelo, was a masterclass in exploiting institutional voids. In 1484, Pope Sixtus I had just died. Rome fell into a power vacuum. 7 months pregnant, Caterina rode alone into Castel Sant'Angelo, the Pope's treasury and arsenal. Whoever held that fortress could shape the papal election. How did she take it? Partly bravado, partly bribing the garrison, partly forging documents, using the chaos to skip verification. She held it for 11 days, forcing opposing factions to negotiate with her husband. Girolamo agreed to terms, but Caterina thought they weren't good enough, and her husband had to beg his wife to hand over the castle. In the end, she secured full ownership of 2 towns, due her husband's military command and financial reparations. So why did this system work for her? Because 15th century Italian city-states had no unified sovereignty. Every lord played a game of multiple loyalties. Legitimacy from the Pope, military force from mercenary contracts, money from taxes and plunder. These 3 could be traded, mortgaged, and swapped. Caterina Sforza understood this deeply. She trained her own troops, did her own diplomacy, and even studied poisons and alchemy, not as a hobby, but as tools to win allies. So why did she ultimately lose? Not because she wasn't ruthless enough, but because the rules of the game changed with the French invasion and the rise of Pope Alexander V. The Borgia Pope, the Papal States began centralizing Gaul. The Borgias used marriage, poison, and military conquest to fold scattered minor lordships back into the Papal States. Mercenary contracts became unreliable because Borgia himself was the biggest employer. Caterina's intelligence and skill couldn't survive that institutional shift. The Borgias used the same tools, but played bigger and dirtier. By 1500, she was captured by papal forces and imprisoned by the Borgia army. Her lands were gone, her children scattered. She died in 1509. Think this story is ancient history? Today, when Western media discuss strong female leaders, they often pull out Caterina as a case study, especially comparing her to Cersei in Game of Thrones. But they usually leave the crazy woman label intact, omitting the complex city-state politics behind her. Even the line, "I have the tools to make more," gets reduced to a shocking soundbite. A perfect demonstration of inheritance rules. Italy's modern regionalism and nepotism. Their roots lie in this legacy of multiple authorities. Before unification, every city-state had its own independent sources of legitimacy and logic of power exchange ingrained over centuries into the local DNA. So here's the bottom line. Caterina Sforza's legendary moments are not freak show anecdotes. They're legitimate plays forced by a system of city-state politics and inheritance laws. She lost not because she wasn't tough, but because the Borgias rewrote the rules. Medieval Europe wasn't just dark and ignorant, it was a precise, loophole-ridden power machine, and behind every crazy woman you hear about are rules she tried to work, only to be crushed by them. Remember, understand the institution first, then judge the person. And if you want to see how the Borgias upgraded that machine, we'll break it down next time.